All right, welcome everyone. We're here for the Learning Bitcoin and Design session. And wow, that says Learning and Bitcoin Design, which is not what it's supposed to say. One second, let me fix that. Learning Bitcoin and Design. This is a call series we started doing earlier in the year to kind of help some newer people in the community learn about Lightning, and then we started exploring other topics in Bitcoin and related to UI and UX design, and took a little bit of a hiatus for now for a little bit there, and now we're back. So I got Dan Gould with me here, and we are going to be talking about PayJoins today. Cool. So Dan, thanks for coming to talk about PayJoins with us here.
Thanks for having me, Stephen.
You have a document here that we've shared in the Figma chat. Uh, let's see. So I'll
It's
go
also
ahead.
in the Jitsi chat.
Yeah, that's what I meant to say.
Oh, okay.
So thank you for correcting me. All right, cool.
I'll make sure you find
So
it.
yeah, I got some of this kind of stuff here, and I got the Figma open if we need to like draw any kind of diagrams and visuals and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, maybe you could just like start us off by like what exactly is a pay join?
Yeah, I think that's the best place to start. So, PayJoin, I think River Financial here has the best definition, which is PayJoin, also known as pay to endpoint, is a special type of Bitcoin transaction where both the sender and receiver contribute inputs. Um, Typically, just a sender would contribute inputs. So, by doing the interaction where both sender and receiver can contribute inputs, you get some overhead reduction in the transaction size and mining fee and some privacy benefits.
Overhead reduction. What do you mean by that?
So I'm talking about the mining fee. So a transaction has a certain size, and over time, every time you receive Bitcoin, you have an output that you want to make as input to another transaction. And if you want to make a transaction that pays a large output amount, you need many inputs. So we're getting complicated right away. But if you take some over here, if you take some lots of like small inputs and you want to make a huge output, um, you have to make a transaction that lists all of those, and that costs a lot of weight. It costs a lot of rights to the Bitcoin blockchain. So you can consolidate those in a pay join before you do that and end up spending less in mining fees.
Gotcha. Kind of like how like the more inputs you put in a Bitcoin transaction, the more complicated it becomes. And so like you could have like one Bitcoin transaction that's like one BTC, and then you could have another one that's one BTC, but it's coming from 10 small inputs of like a tenth of a Bitcoin each. And so like the one that has more inputs might end up costing more money.
That's right. And it might end up costing more money, and sometimes you won't even have enough to pay large outputs. Like if you're an enterprise, especially, or a lightning routing node, you might need to make large payouts frequently and end up with lots of small um, outputs that you need to consolidate over time just in order to manage your wallet.
Got it. Makes sense. So yeah, so you got like so we talked about that it's a privacy tool. So I'm just gonna like kind of for my own thinking here, make sure I have this kind of repeated in my own words here. So it's basically pay join is a transaction where the receiver contributes input to the transaction to give privacy benefits to both parties. That kind of do I got that right?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay. Um, what and how would this differ then? I mean, it sounds similar coin join when people hear it. How does this kind of differ from a traditional coin join?
So the big difference from a traditional coin join is you don't have a coordinator. So in traditional coin join, everyone that participates talks to a centralized service in order to collaborate, but with PayJoin, it's just two peers that directly collaborate.
Nice. Then
There's another important difference I want to touch on, which is in a PayJoin, you can use nearly completely arbitrary amounts. So what I mean by that is if I want to pay you 99 cents, a dollar, $99, $150, let's say it's sats, 150 sats, any amount is going to work in a PayJoin, but a CoinJoin, as they're implemented today, you usually have a standard denomination and you're not making a payment. You're not choosing the destination. So three things: no coordinator, it's peer-to-peer. You can send any amount and you're actually choosing the amount. So you're like making a payment. It's not a intermediate step. It's not a mixing step.
All right, let's go ahead and like put these in a column real quick and just kind of like compare those kind of like cost benefits real quick here. So it's like, traditional coin join, and then I'll make that large, and then we'll say, okay, so with a traditional coin join, you're going to have a fixed amount, and then you're also going to have it go through a centralized coordinator service, and then it's sort of a mixing step.
Yeah, it's not a direct transfer.
Yeah.
There's got to be a way to say that eloquently.
But a PayJoin, I think it makes sense to me when we like put them side by side. It's like PayJoin, it's just peer to peer. Arbitrary amount, and then it's like you are paying somebody.
Yeah, it's a transfer from A to B. Exactly.
Whereas like, this one is like more like, A to mixer back to A but secret. So there's like all these other, it's like a whole other step there. And then I guess, every time if you want to keep your coins private, then you're constantly having to coin join things over and over again.
Yeah, maybe the way to think about it is the consequence of the mixing step, where if you have that mixing step, you require very specific coin control to maintain your privacy. But with a PayJoin, in isolation, you don't, because you're making the payment. Like in CoinJoin, you make a payment. Sorry, you do the CoinJoin, you get a CoinJoin output. You can make a payment from that, but then you end up with this toxic change thing. Coin control is at least more complicated. Yeah.
Got it. So let's like maybe like we could just like visualize this for a minute here. So we put, all right. So like, kind of traditional coin join would probably be something like, okay, 1 BTC, 2 BTC,
Seem happy. Seem happy.
another 1 BTC. I'll say 3 BTC.
Goodbye. Oh yeah, thank you. I wanted to give one to my wife.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, she's a noob, so I want to see how she like interacts with it. Yeah, exactly.
We can pull the example from the Bitcoin wiki.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
We can use the two-party one, I think.
Which one are you looking at?
Paste it in chat.
Bugs.
Maybe also
I have the TXID, so.
The last week and a half. So of course, the second week he's gone. A bunch of shit hits the fan. Classic. Is he accessible? I mean, yeah.
Here it is. So this is a two-party coin join in Jitsi from blockstream.info.
Like adept with dealing with the customer service people, and they all speak Portuguese. Or
Sweet, because that local Bitcoins link did not work for me.
Really, to their credit, they
Yeah,
speak
not for me
really
either.
good, and they can type out things in English really
And then
well.
there's a PayJoin
Sometimes it's like the sky is falling, the sky is falling,
example.
and really it's like not that big of a deal. It's like something that can just fade into distance, and it never had maybe just a random bug exception that never happens again. But to them, it's always like a big deal.
Yeah. Interesting. Maybe that's is this only 2 inputs to this one?
Yes. Yeah, I think it's worthwhile to show
Zeno is the only
2 participant
attention.
like traditional coin join and a 2 participant pay join. I have a 3 participant too. This is the TX ID. Oh, let me just
Got it.
Put it in the backlog.
would that be useful?
Yeah. I guess I guess I keep thinking in my mind about the like traditional coin join where you've got, or I guess I always think of, when I think of coin joins, I think of it as like like hundreds of people in the same transaction, or like is that accurate? Like I think about like Wasabi Wallet.
Yeah, I think usually they're around 50 people a lot of the time. I think that one's 92 it begins with. Yeah, that's a 3 participant one. So for the sake of education, I think
cool.
Those are sufficient.
Okay.
And if we want a pay join example, let me grab one of those.
Perfect. I'm gonna just copy this over.
Okay. This one is from Blockchair. Let me just move it to Blockstream so we have the same. So I just posted yeah, there you got it.
And this is an example of a pay join?
Yes. Yes, there's movement of 0.2 Bitcoin or 0.002 Bitcoin or 0.012 Bitcoin. There are 2 interpretations to this.
Okay, yeah. So it's interesting. So just for anyone watching this later, it's like you got your traditional coin join over here, 3 participants. Then over here you have 0.01, 0.01, 0.01. So we assume each participant got 0.01 Bitcoin back. I guess that was some change that went back to somebody.
And the first one, we know that's change that comes from the second input.
Interesting.
That's the heuristic. Assuming this is a coin join, that second input makes change, and it has to come back to it somewhere.
And the reason we can assume that is because basically these inputs over here aren't large enough to be able to produce that quantity of change. Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah. So then we go over here, and so like the privacy, I guess over here is just that, like, okay, everybody has 0.01, 0.01, 0.01 BTC. So you don't really know. You might know who the second input belongs to, but you don't know necessarily who these 3 belong to yet. It could be any one of the 3. But then over here, what's going on here?
So this could be a whole lot of things. This could be someone like a single wallet making a payment of 0.025, where in order to make that payment, you'd need to fund with both inputs because neither input is enough to fund the second output. Do you follow?
So yeah, so possibility one is paying 0.025 BTC by combining two inputs. Sense?
right? And the second possibility is it's the first input the second input paying the first output to the person that controls the first input.
Second output paying. No, I'm sorry. We're saying it's the second input. It's paying the first output to the person who owns the first input. And so that makes sense. We
Is
could
that
say,
right?
well, let's do the math real quick. It's 0.013, so that would be enough to pay a 0.01 output.
But we don't end up with a 200,000 Satoshi change, so I'm not sure that interpretation is actually right. I think this has the first interpretation. It also has the interpretation where the second input paid the person who controls the first input and the second output. I think those are the only two interpretations.
Got it. Okay.
And that's because is this cropped? Oh, if this were uncropped, if you look,
Yeah, let's go look at
it has something called unnecessary input heuristic.
Mm,
So there are some ways to avoid to make it completely ambiguous, but it doesn't have that second ambiguity.
got it. You know, maybe it'd be good, like now that we're kind of talking about this, like why don't I saw one document that you linked to here. Actually, I thought explained this very simply. Um, I just got to find which one it was, but it had like a very simple example. Oh, what did I just do there? It had a really simple example that was just like, yeah, this one. Okay. Oh, I had to like that. So this was kind of weird to think about it. So it's like, okay, so I've got 2 Bitcoin and 5 Bitcoin on the left as my inputs here, and then I'm sending that into this transaction here. It has a 3 Bitcoin output and a 4 Bitcoin output. And so, what were they saying? So it could be interpreted as a simple transaction paying to someone with leftover change. Another interpretation is that the 2 Bitcoin input is owned by a merchant and 5 Bitcoin is owned by their customer. This transaction involves the customer paying 1 Bitcoin to the merchant. There's no way of telling which of these two interpretations is correct. That's weird to think about, but I guess the math makes sense. Because if the merchant started with 2 Bitcoin, then they would end up with 3, and that would be like they got a 1 Bitcoin payment. And so, yeah, I mean, it makes sense, I think. So, and that's kind of like, it's almost like what you're, this like little simple example here is kind of like this picture you're showing here. It's just that, we're not dealing with these easy, digestible, clean, round numbers. We're now dealing with messy real world numbers here, but it's the same basic concept with this transaction that we don't really know exactly what happened. We can see on the blockchain, which inputs went in, which outputs went out, but we don't necessarily know what that corresponds to in the real world. Who is paying who for what?
Yeah, it has the same two interpretations as the simple example, and it means that any real world example that follows this form also could be a PayJoin or change consolidation.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So any transaction that follows this form, and so I think they called it, was it the common input heuristic? Basically, just that like if blockchain analysis software just kind of operates under this idea where like if you see a bunch of inputs going into a transaction, then like it's pretty common for those all to be owned by the same person. Like they're more statistically very likely to be owned by the same person. But if every transaction becomes a pay join, then you make it that you no longer can make that assumption. Is that kind of a good understanding of it?
That's right. That's right. Within the narrow definition we have here, that's anything with multiple inputs and two outputs.
Got it. So what would yeah, what's kind of like a holdup of page, like what's stopping people from using this?
I think the biggest thing holding up PayJoin is that there's no easy way to implement it. So there's no like standard library. Like if you want to add Lightning to your app, you have LDK and you can just pull the components you need. I think Lightning Network is similar in that it's an interactive protocol, meaning both the sender and the receiver of a Lightning payment need to be online in the same way the sender and receiver need to be online to make a PayJoin. So there's been some attempts at library software in JavaScript, but they haven't been maintained and they haven't been widespread. Now I'm working on a PayJoin library in Rust, which is kind of like LDK in that you can just compile it to WebAssembly and run it anywhere.
Nice. And then so then the idea being that any project, I guess, that uses Rust would be able to incorporate that into their software.
Well, they don't even need to use Rust. That's the beautiful thing, is anything that has the ability to run a web stack can incorporate it. So it's literally anything. If your software is written in Go, there's a WebAssembly runtime. If your software is written in C or C++, there's a WebAssembly runtime.
Got
If
it.
your software runs in the browser, WebAssembly, that is a WebAssembly runtime. So you can just drop the compiled library in and call it from JavaScript.
Got it. That makes sense. So like, what would this look like, from the user's perspective? Do you think? Like, what's I guess what I'm trying to think about is like not only like what do they see on screen, but also like does this cost them more in fees, and does this require updates and interaction from the user in any way? Very broad question, but
Yeah. So I think the one to look at if you want to take a peek would be the very first link, the how PayJoin works in Blue Wallet, or at least did. I don't think PayJoin works in Blue Wallet right now. Sorry, I'm calling you out, Blue Wallet, but it seems like it's not maintained to me. But the experience could be the same as scanning a Lightning invoice, where you just scan a QR code and it spins for a minute and works. That's in a perfect world where everyone's using unified QRs and everyone supports PayJoin. Right now, there's usually a little bit more involved because people have to go down to, if you look on screen, this payment link, that's what includes the PayJoin, but not necessarily, it's not the same as just a Bitcoin address. And there in Blue Wallet too, they have to turn a switch on, which you shouldn't have to do. Do we want to watch that again and maybe narrate what's happening?
yeah, and maybe if you like want me to pause or something, just let me know.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Sure. Welcome to the call, newcomer. We're looking at what a PayJoin does right now. So this is in BTC Pay. This is what you're paying an invoice looks like for 3,777 sats. You can play the video. This is just a Bitcoin address. To PayJoin in this old version of BTC Pay, you have to go and copy the payment link down there, which contains all the information to PayJoin. When you pull that into Blue Wallet, it automatically detects that it can PayJoin. And then you just click send. And it should spin, negotiate, and make the payment.
Wish they would have hung on that last slide for a little bit there. So okay, let me make sure I get this right. So they're generating it here in BTC Pay Server, and they have the payment link. Is that just like a BIP21 link?
Yeah, that's a BIP21.
Okay, and so I guess there's like some additional metadata that they're including in the link that like says this we want to do a pay join.
That's right. There are a few extra parameters on the payment link on the
Mhm.
BIP21 that are defined in the PayJoin spec, but the main one is just a server endpoint because they have to be able to talk to each other.
Makes sense. Okay, so they copy it and then they paste the link into the address field there, and then so that's actually really cool to hear because if that sounds to me like one of the kind of things I was curious about was what happens like if one person's wallet wants to receive it as a pay join and the other person can't send or vice versa, like what that looks like. So it seems like if the person on the BTC Pay side, the recipient, wants to receive this as a pay join, they can request it by providing a payment link with some kind of metadata, and then if I pass it over to my wallet, and it should be able to scan it because any wallet should be BIP21 compatible, but it scans it, and if it doesn't recognize the PayJoin metadata in the link, then it's just going to send it through as a regular Bitcoin transaction. So it seems like there's
That's
like
right.
it's going to fall back. It's still going to work.
Yes. And in BTC Pay, in the latest version, you should be able to turn it on just like you described. So it always shows up as the main unified QR code,
Mhm.
and anyone that scans it, if they have the option, can choose to pay that way.
Nice. Okay. And does BTC Pay support pay joins like out of the box?
They do, yeah.
Oh, awesome! I didn't even know that. So that's the thing is like I guess I thought that this was like a little more like still in the beginning experimental stages. I didn't realize there was such like software you could download right now that already has it.
Yeah, we can pull open I think it's the second link in the Google Docs, shows you who supports it right now. PayJoin adoption.
Yeah, let's take a look at that. Let's see.
And it's not only that it can be communicated through BIP21, it's the spec insists that it's communicated that way. So it's, it follows the standards tracks for things.
Where did you want me in this document?
The second link at the very top.
Ah, got it. Second link. This one, page on adoption. There we go.
Yeah, PayJoin adoption. You can see which projects support this. So there are only a few right now. And like I said, I think it's because there's no easy way for people to include this. And it's like if everyone needed to implement HTTP separately, no one would use it. But there are standard libraries that you can pull in any software to make a request. Like in Python, you just pull the request library and you can communicate using that protocol. It's the same thing. Everyone has rolled their own implementations here. BTC Pay Server and Wasabi Wallet are both written in C#, but they have totally different implementations. Join Market's implementation is in Python. Blue Wallets is in JavaScript, and Sparrows is in Java. And then you can also see that only a few projects set up receiving because you need to run a server. And I think that's a problem too.
Yeah, so I guess let's dig into that a little bit. So you need to set up to send. That's no problem because you're just talking, I guess, to the recipient's pay join server. But if you want to receive, you need to have a server that's online. So what would go into actually setting up a pay join server for the user? Like what is like what's the blocker there?
So the blocker is there's no like unified app to just do that on Umbrel or do that off of your Bitcoin core. And that's another thing I've been working on. You can do it now with the No Looking app. You can receive a page join on your Umbrel, but it's for channel opening. It's not just the basic page join. So right now, today, if you want to set up regular PayJoin server, you probably need to host BTC Pay server or join market.
Got it. But like, is this something that theoretically could be added to a mobile wallet? That like I'll say a on-chain and Lightning wallet that somebody just downloads from the App Store. Could that kind of device just run a PayJoin server?
Yeah, I think you could do it the same way that you do, like, what do they call it? Do they call it offline Lightning payments, or the one where you get woken up by a? So this is also technical, but on the mobile wallets, it's hard to receive
Yeah,
Lightning
yeah.
payments because you need to be online. But you could use the same techniques you use for that to receive a PayJoin, where you start the service in the background and receive a PayJoin.
Well, I mean, you're right, and that's a very common thing we talked about a lot in the design community. It's just this kind of issue with being able to receive Lightning payments when you're offline. So yeah, I think it's a topic. It's at least a grievance that a lot of folks in the community are familiar with. I think. And I know that like different people have different like solutions to that. Like I know, yeah, you had it with Chaincase for a little bit, where like I think it would send you push notifications for some things, but not for other things. I know Eclair. I think I saw a tweet. They what is it with Phoenix Wallet? They had made some announcement on Twitter that they had found a way to, I guess, get your iOS app to like wake up and like basically receive the Lightning payment if they sent it a certain signal or something like that. So
Yeah, they do use the notification extensions. So when you receive a notification payload, it turns the app on and handles that. It processes it. It has 30 seconds to do that, and then it uh, shuts off from the background. So in that 30 seconds, you can process a Lightning payment. This is the same extension that, say we're using an encrypted chat app. When you send me a notification, it wakes up the app in the background, decrypts the message, and displays it to you. So you have that same short period, which doesn't necessarily work for CoinJoin protocols, but it should work for PayJoin protocols.
yeah, because it just seems like it's a much simpler, quicker payment. I guess you're not waiting for coordination from multiple. Like if a coin join has like 30 people, then you have to coordinate with 30 people to make that transaction happen. But this is a much simpler kind of thing that can happen in a quicker amount of time, I guess.
That's right. There's also an interesting thing you could do, switching the networking roles around, where, say, a Lightning service, like a swap service, wanted to pay a user on chain. Say that you had some Lightning funds, you wanted to send it to Bolts and get an on chain output, Bitcoin output. If Bolts was set up to PayJoin, Bolts could also decide they want to be a sort of pull PayJoin server instead of push. So instead of asking the receiver for a BIP21
Mhm.
that you then make a request to that server, you could send half the PayJoin straight to the sender if you're the receiver, and pull the PayJoin from them. They could just return the PayJoin with their input there. So you could swap the roles to run the server, but there's no spec for that yet.
Yeah, interesting. So I know, yeah, you mentioned that you wanted to get into pool pay joins a little bit. So this might be a good time. So okay, I guess you call the other one push pay join? Just
Yes,
okay. So push
I
pay
think
join.
that works.
So push pay join is basically I'm a recipient. I run my own pay join server. I'm going to request when I request money from you, I'm going to request that you send it to me via a PayJoin, and here's how you talk to my PayJoin server in order to make that happen. So that would be a push one. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay. And then the pull one, how does that differ?
The pull one, the best example is if you're pulling from a service that's always online already,
Mhm.
then instead of, like, with a push pay join, the recipient shares a BIP21 address. Instead, you don't need an address. You don't need to ask, where do I send this money to? Or you do need to ask where you send the money to. But instead of just asking for the destination, you can tell the server both the destination and your input right away. So you can tell the sender in one message where you want the output to go and the input you contribute. And then the sender will add their input and their change, send it back to you, and then you as the receiver would broadcast. I had a little diagram.
Oh yeah, where is it?
I gotta find it.
Okay.
This is a very new idea. This is like yesterday drafted. This idea has been drafted yesterday, so. Thanks to Michael from Bolts for the inspiration. I'm taking a screenshot right now. Okay. Where are you in this Figma document? Are you on a different page?
I'm like way over yonder. Yeah, there I am. I see you.
Oh, okay. So this is what a PayJoin. I can get a push PayJoin in contrast, of course. I don't want to spend too much time on this because this idea is not fully fleshed out yet, but the idea is that unlike Lightning Network, where you need both peers to be online all the time because it's a what do you call that? It has multiple rounds of communication typically for most of the protocol. With PayJoin, you just have one round. It's a very simple interactive protocol. And did this paste in yet? Oh, I'm trying to paste into the video. That's not right. There it is. Okay. So really only one person needs to be online. You need an endpoint, that's all.
Okay, that's what you're saying. So first thing that happens here. Sorry, go ahead.
The sender and the receiver swapped their direction. It's doing the same protocol, roughly the same messages, backwards. So you can see the sender is on the left for a pull and the receiver's on a right. But in your classic BIP78, the receiver's on the left and the sender's on the right because the receiver generates the address first.
Got it. So
in the pull PayJoin, the sender produces a address. It's more like an invoice versus. Is that right? No, that's not right. Never mind the invoice thing.
Got it. Makes sense. Yeah, so send BIP21. It's got the, I guess, PJ parameter in there. Then sends back a PSBT. Then sender sends a PSBT to the receiver. Receiver, PayJoin proposal, PSBT. And then, so I guess they sign it here, send it back, sender signs it, and then broadcasts it.
That's right.
Whereas on the pool PayJoin, the sender starts and basically, I guess, sends a message somehow to pool PayJoin. How are they like messaging? Are they just like messaging the receiver's PayJoin server here?
Well, let's go back to the Bolts swap example. So if you pay a Lightning invoice to Bolts to get on-chain Bitcoin out, you're going to be on a web page and you're going to have an input box you can already communicate. Because they're a swap service, you already know where to find them. So you can just put your endpoint in there.
Got it. Okay.
Or you can just put your request to them.
Got it. So it sounds like, but I guess this would still, I mean, would this kind of still suffer from the same problem of, if the user's phone is off, then it's difficult for them to, be able to receive?
I don't think so, because you're not even going to be able to make this request if your phone is off. So your phone is going to be on if you're giving it destination. If you're receiving a swap from Bolts, you're gonna at that time say, "Send my money here." You're receiving, but you don't have to host a server. That's the biggest difference.
Got it. That's the difference with the pool one, is that you don't need to host your own PayJoin server to receive.
That's right. Yeah.
Interesting. So that could be something to kind of watch, I guess. So what do you think? I mean, in terms of just circling back a little bit to the kind of the user and like how it kind of affects them. So one of the kind of questions I had that I think you've already answered, but I want to dig into a little deeper, is about fees. I was kind of concerned when I first heard, kind of like with CoinJoins, with traditional CoinJoins, you're constantly paying a fee every single time you run these coins through these collaborative transactions. Same thing with PayJoin. I mean, I assume you must have to have a transaction fee, and I guess I was kind of in my mind keeping in the same category. But I think you were saying that there's actually reduced fees by using PayJoins.
Because when you use CoinJoin, you pay the miner fee, you pay the coordinator fee, and then every time you make your transfer, you're paying another miner fee, and you're usually making change that you'll have to consolidate with another miner fee. PayJoin, you do all those 4 fees in one transaction.
Yeah, because I guess like since no one's assembling this for you. There's no server assembling this. It's just between you and the peer that you're trying to pay or to receive from. So it's like you're not going to like charge each other fees for this service. And then and is there some other advantage too of just the fact that like you can consolidate like I guess you were saying with like coin joins, you end up with like all of the toxic change, and you end up with many smaller outputs. But with this, you actually end up with larger, more consolidated UTXOs.
Yeah, with this, because you don't have that zero knowledge communication with a coordinator where the participants don't know each other. In PayJoin, the participants do know each other, so you have to trust your counterparty to some extent that they're not surveilling you because you don't get the protection from your peers. But you don't have the change problem, so any third-party observer is not going to be able to watch the same way a third-party observer to a CoinJoin may be able to. And with transfers, it makes the biggest difference. I think a big problem that Lightning Network solved was we were doing all of this communication on chain. We were keeping all these database entries on chain where we really could just use purpose-built networking. We could use the internet to keep all those intermediary stages. PayJoin's kind of the same thing. You're looking into the future and consolidating a bunch of intermediary stages that never get posted to the blockchain. Or in the Lightning case where you're doing a Lightning channel opening using a PayJoin, if you had to fund your node and then open channels, if you can't specify that all beforehand, you're really using the Bitcoin blockchain to keep track of intermediary stages that don't serve any utility. You can get rid of all of that by using the internet to communicate with a database on each of your computers instead of using the global Bitcoin ledger database.
Got it. So this is it's interesting. So it's like it's almost for the user, provided that like I almost see like, I mean, let's assume that a wallet, you have the dev kit that you need in order to be able to implement PayJoins in your wallet product or whatever. It's almost like there doesn't seem, I'm not seeing like a disadvantage to turning this option on for the user. Like, is like I'm trying to think of like what would be the case against PayJoin? Why would you not include it as an option?
The worst thing I can think of is if you want all of your receiving UTXOs to go right into cold storage, you can't have PayJoin because
Oh yeah.
if you're receiving a PayJoin, you need to be able to sign that you contributed some input. But if you're willing to run a Lightning node, or if you're a merchant that occasionally spends, it probably makes sense to have some hot UTXOs. literally the only, like, steel manning the case for why would you not run this. That's the only thing that's
So so
really not good about it.
so help me understand why would a PayJoin be bad if you were sending it to cold storage?
Well, it just wouldn't work because when you receive a request to receive a PayJoin, I want to send money to Steven, and Steven, you say, um, okay, I accept PayJoins. When I send you a request to PayJoin, an original PSBT, you have to add your input to it and then also sign it. So that key to sign it needs to be online. If you only
Got it.
accept cold storage, you're not going to be able to make signatures unless you get a notification right then and I wait for you to turn on your cold wallet and sign it. It's an interactive protocol, so both parties have to have keys online.
I get what you're saying. Yeah, so it's like if I wanted to send my funds directly to cold storage, then yeah, that would be a bad idea. You wouldn't be able to have like the page. Yeah, it doesn't make sense because the PayJoin server needs to be online. It's this interactive thing, and then that whole process gets interrupted by me needing to pull my hardware wallet out and enter in the passcode and all this kind of stuff. So
And
that
it's more
makes sense.
complex. You need to run a server. Like that's if you can't run a server or your counterparty can't run a server, it's added complexity. It's more difficult. You wouldn't be able to pay join.
Yeah. How long are like a PayJoin like server strings? Like one issue we've been kind of you know looking at least on like the unified QR code project is just like the size of the QR codes and all of that. So I'm just trying to think like what like how much like extra weight does the PayJoin parameter add to the QR code?
So it's I'm not sure in bytes, but I know in characters it's just
Yeah.
PJ and then the endpoint. So
Yeah. Just
there are a lot of things you could do to mitigate that to make it smaller. You could use a shortener, but if you have an onion endpoint, you have a fixed length of characters. You have a sort of long address, and then there are additional parameters beyond that endpoint that you can use, but in practice they're seldom used.
so you could do here. You could basically do like an HT. You could do like an just HTTPS, I assume, and then you could also do a Tor address, right?
Yeah, it has to be a secured endpoint because if you had a man in the middle, if someone could intercept the communications, they could change uh, the information they want you to sign, and they could trick you. They could change the output where you're sending the money. So you really need a secured endpoint. But you could even shorten that. If we made a standard to get rid of the HTTPS, you could just assume that if there wasn't an onion endpoint.
Hmm.
Um, or you could just make it. Yeah, there's a lot you could do to shorten it, but
That makes sense.
maybe not necessary yet. I don't know, how often do you run into these issues with the unified QR code?
Oh, it's kind of a temporary problem, in my view. It's like actually, well, we've been happy to not run into the issue too much. It's just more of a, it's kind of a theoretical problem. It depends on the phone, right? So it's like when you're adding like a Bolt 11 Lightning invoice and an on-chain address into the same QR code, like already Bolt 11 is like hugely complicated, um, and then then you're adding in the on-chain stuff on top of that. So it's like you increase the size of the QR code a bit. Um, and I was just trying to think like, well, if you add even more onto it, but as time goes on, things will change. I mean, for one thing, these phone cameras just get better and better, and so it's more a concern with like, well, what if somebody has an older device? Might they have difficulty reading this really complicated QR code? But if the industry starts moving towards Bolt 12 or something like that, then the QR code is probably going to get smaller. So it's maybe not like a huge deal. I was just kind of curious, and I guess that kind of leads me thinking into like, okay, so like just because I was thinking about unified QR codes and Lightning and on chain and the same QR, I'm curious how this like kind of relates to like other privacy tools, like for a user, do you think do they just need PayJoin? Do they need PayJoin and kind of like another stack of privacy tools? Like how does this fit in?
Well, when I think of on-chain transactions, I tend to think of the sort of sovereign use case. So Lightning probably won't be able to scale, or even people won't want Lightning to scale where every person has their own Lightning channel. There's things like hosted channels or custodial wallets that people can still access Lightning with and get a lot of benefits. So when I think of on-chain, I'm thinking of people with a higher sovereign use case. And then when people want privacy tech on top, even higher threshold threat model. So PayJoin alone, like I said, doesn't protect you from your counterparty. If you want that protection from your counterparty, we're going to have to innovate more. I think to make PayJoin and what we think of now as CoinJoins more of a similar thing, where you can do a transfer through a CoinJoin, because that's the only way we're going to be able to get that privacy from our peers. I think that's possible, but no one has shipped that yet.
Mm.
And then there's also the network security issue where even if you're using a coordinator, if you're making some payment where the peer doesn't know who you are, you need to be able to protect your device's IP address, your device's network stack from being compromised. So there's a whole plethora of issues, but I think PayJoin right now solves this transfer problem from the problem where third parties can just snoop on all your transactions if they know one of your inputs. They can follow that all the way down the line. This kills that for a global passive adversary, and it gives us a way to step toward fixing the problem of protection from your peer. I think it gives us a starting place because all on-chain amount correlations can be fixed with this sort of collaboration where multiple people collaborate to a single transaction.
That makes sense. And then so it kind of provides this kind of, it doesn't fix every problem. It sounds like what you're saying, but that it provides this kind of extra layer of confusion for people, for, like you said, I think you would use the term you used was like passive global analysis or something like that. Like it provides this kind of extra layer. So that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes an attacker do more work to figure out who you are. Just looking at the chain and following your withdrawal from Coinbase is not enough to track all your activity if you're using this.
That's awesome. So, and then, maybe we're kind of up on the hour here, so I want to be like mindful of your time. But like maybe, honestly, we should got into this earlier. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about what you're doing with like no looking and all of that. One of the winning projects of Legends of Lightning, because that uses PayJoins, right?
Yeah, that's no looking. We got a third place in global adoption. Thanks for the organizers of that. Anyone listening to this should go and do that competition when they host again in the spring. But this is the no looking website here. What we do is open a whole bunch of Lightning channels in the same transaction you would use to fund your node. So you don't have to pay a whole bunch of fees. You don't have to wait for confirmations. We just fill out a form of the channels you want to open, including some that we might recommend, or a payment to lease inbound capacity. You need all these things to get your node fully up and running. You click generate funding QR. It shows you a QR code, and then you scan. It does the PayJoin transaction, and your node is ready to go.
Nice.
So it runs on Umbo right now, and anyone with an LND can ask me for help getting set up. It's not too hard. It's a tiny program that does one thing.
Nice. And I mean, it almost seems like it solves like a couple problems in one. I mean, it's like one of these problems is like having to wait for multiple channels to clear on the blockchain. So you're combining those into a single transaction there. Then you're adding the PayJoins on top of that for an extra layer. It's nice.
Yeah, and it's a proof of concept for an idea that I think will be more important in the future, especially as Lightning node operators become more enterprise focused and uptime focused, because you could, if the Lightning node peer is the one you're operating that you want to fund, and the channel peer you're opening or closing a channel with supports splicing, you could just splice in more value in a pay join. So you could make one on-chain transaction that just adds to all of your existing channels or spends out of your existing channels instead of all these multiple steps where, like right now, as I said earlier, you fund your node, you have to wait for that to confirm, and then you can open your channels. Most people do that one at a time. And each of
Yeah.
those are a transaction that you pay fees for and you create change.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. I mean, like, yeah, I guess, and that's the thing about it is that, like, it's like Lightning has this layer of privacy, and that you can't see what's going on in the channel. But, once you know who the channel belongs to, then you can start to make some kind of assumptions or guesses about the kinds of activity that are going on. So, that's always a positive thing if we can find ways to actually make the channel itself more private.
Could
I
you
think it's necessary.
Hey there, Dan. Thanks
Hey,
for
Johns.
the explanation there. Joined a bit late. Could you talk a bit more of about the splicing and what you intend on doing with this?
So I don't think splicing is. What's that? Keep going.
Yeah, I don't know really too much about splicing myself.
So if you have a Lightning channel right now, if you want to change the capacity, you have to close it with an on-chain transaction and then open a new transaction with that same peer of a different capacity. Splicing lets you close the transaction and close the channel and open one in one transaction, so you can change the size of the channel without any downtime. And you could do that at the same time as bringing outside funds in with PayJoin because you have this interactive negotiation. So if you wanted to fund your node, not only could you fund new channels, but you could fund existing channels, make them larger.
So it sounds like the channel. Okay, so like it just happens in like the next block versus kind of like two or three blocks or something like this.
Yeah, we take the constraints off where your money can be put to work. If you have interaction through the internet, if you're using an interactive protocol, you can just throw your money exactly where you want it in an instant. You don't need to specify all these places you want your money to go, and you don't need to wait as long. It removes constraints.
Nice. Thanks.
Stephen, what do you think about why this might not have been adopted yet? And Johns, if you have any input to this, I'd be curious to hear it as well.
I mean, it's one of these kind of topics that you don't. I don't know. I think you just don't hear enough. Honestly, it's like I don't hear people talking about it that much. So that might be one thing, just the visibility and not enough talking. I think another thing is it's interesting because in order to use this technology, this is something that it's not just something I can choose to do. It's like everybody has to choose to do it. So like the example, like if we take something like a coin join, you can tell somebody, hey, go download Wasabi Wallet or something like that, and they download the software, and not everyone in the world has to adopt that technology. Not everyone else in the world needs to be using Wasabi in order for me to be able to download that software and use it. So it's much more like with a traditional coin join. I think it's easier to point somebody to how they can do it. Whereas this is like, it's like I can set it up if I guess know how to, I could, do it on BTC Pay server, but in order to actually reap the benefit of that, I have to convince a lot of other people to use it as well. So, I mean, it might be just one of those things too, where it's like you don't reap the benefits until everybody supports it, and if no one supports it, then no one sees the benefit. It's like a chicken and egg problem. I don't know.
Actually, with PayJoins, like more people get the benefit of PayJoins than if even a few people use it, right? Dan?
Yeah, we were talking about that in the beginning because everyone gets the ambiguity because it looks like a transaction that could be made even without PayJoin.
Yeah. So then it breaks that what was it common owner input heuristic.
Well, let me
Yep.
let me let me dig into that a little bit, because I think that it it seems like there needs to be like a certain threshold of like pay join transactions in order for it to like break that heuristic. Like you can't just be like, okay, well there's 5 PayJoin transactions on the blockchain, so suddenly like billions of other transactions are suddenly like probably like it seems like there needs to be a statistically significant amount of PayJoin transactions before it breaks the heuristic. Am I?
Well, I guess we wouldn't know if it's a PayJoin transaction then, right? So then maybe it is getting adopted, but we can assume that it's not being adopted because we know that the softwares don't support it, and I think that's where it kind of like that first point that you made, Stephen, which was a lot of people just don't know about these things. I think that is the important part. They just don't know it, and developers kind of like they don't really see the incentive. I mean, you started the unified QR code thing, for example, to get more awareness, and people are like, oh wow, didn't know you can do that. But it's there in the specifications, and it can be used. So I think as part of the design community and just like people who care about these things, we need to kind of like champion them a bit more to raise that awareness. And hopefully when people start seeing kind of like the use cases and the demand for it increases, then that kind of influences them more to get it implemented. I mean, we see it in all different we see it in all different specs and forms, and you could also look at the access of it, right? If a developer or wallet developer doesn't put it into the wallet, then then the users don't get access to these technology to these schemes. So I really think it's down to like how much it gets implemented and how much people understand what benefits there are, and those people end up being developers and designers at the end of the day.
Well, and that's where those with some power can really come in and help too. I think when Cash App decided we're going to read unified QR codes, it
Yeah.
creates some incentive for people to, to be able to read those. If Cash App shows a unified QR code and users want to pay that, they're going to yell at the developers wherever their Bitcoin is and say, "Hey, this doesn't work. Let's fix this." So we do need some help from the benevolent people with power.
Yeah, but I'm kind of like tired of waiting and like trying to convince um, like more players and stuff to do things like this. I think another angle is also like new wallets and existing wallets with like active developer communities and stuff that are open source. Like running those campaigns to try to convince them. I mean, otherwise, we're always going to be beholden to these large organizations which have their kind of like, their rationale or reasonings or processes or bureaucracy to get things adopted. And I think, this is something that, Dan, we've been talking about this for what, like 2 years now, and like,
Yeah.
come on.
It only came into focus for me very recently, though. I'd say within the last 6 months, I realized, oh, like PayJoin is the thing that actually had some traction and people are interested in and can really make a difference, and is being neglected. Because CoinJoin is where people see money, so you get a lot of investment into that because you can get money out of it. But PayJoin is kind of this open standard that's really helpful, and that's where places like the Bitcoin design community can help a ton. I don't know if we can if we can expand the Bitcoin wallet kit to show what an optimal PayJoin flow would look like. Like we just saw the BTC Pay server Blue Wallet flow, and already we're like, okay, this could be deleted. This could be deleted. We can make this simpler. We have a chance to set an example here by spending some precious time and energy to just guide people and show some education.
Well, you remember we did the I don't know, the MIT hackathon, was it last year? Stephen, you were there too, and that was a
Yep.
PayJoin, the peer-to-peer PayJoin, right? So it's been a little longer than than that. I think the benefit of these things are kind of like it's just known by like a few people. So I'm definitely with you of like whatever we can do in the Bitcoin design community, and it would encourage any designers out there as well who wants to, help push these privacy schemes a little bit more forward for everyone's benefit.
Is there a PayJoins section of the guide?
No, we probably have a definition of it, but in the glossary, but no
Well,
section.
that's a good question. Let's figure it out. There's not like just a hey article about PayJoins, but good to know if it is in the. It's one of these kinds of things where we're always kind of trying to think about like like when it comes to like specific technologies. I'm kind of like how am I trying to word this? I don't want to like kind of like I feel like as a designer, it's not up to me sometimes to like pick winners and losers. It's kind of like it's up to engineers to kind of discuss and debate like what's the best implementation of these ideas, right? So sometimes I shy away from including like too much stuff, at least on the sections of the guide that I contribute to. Like unless it's like something that's like seriously, like this has a lot of momentum behind it. But then having said that, we have a glossary sometimes where we like define some of these things. Is like privacy is kind of an interesting concept in the guide because like there's some of it that's like a UI UX level thing where like the designer has to make a good user interface around it, and sometimes it's a situation where like it's up to the developers to actually implement some of this stuff. So I don't know. So I guess like privacy is one of those sorts of situations where like we sort of struggle finding the best way to approach it in the guide. Let's see also
Right.
PayJoin.
Then we say, hey, you need to put your
Yeah, I found it in the glossary, and then it's in the design principles. There's one line that says embrace privacy preserving options when relevant and lists PayJoin as an option. I also am going to paste in chat, relevant to something we talked a little bit earlier, how many PayJoins do you need in order to skew people's privacy? There's this PayJoins and unnecessary input heuristic paper that came out a couple years ago. Stephen, I think you're muted now, which may have been intentional. I don't know.
Yeah, it was intentional.
Okay. But this paper dives deep into the different ways you could categorize transactions as PayJoin or not as PayJoin, because the scholars haven't come to consensus on what is a PayJoin and what isn't. And so that's an interesting first take of what chain analysis can find on chain. And it turns out a lot of transactions, like I think many hundreds of thousands in that time period, could be PayJoins or these merges. So by rolling PayJoin out as a possibility, we're helping a whole lot of people. And I think the definition can be expanded too from these two output transactions. Like when we're doing the channel openings, we can create way more than two outputs and preserve privacy for all of them. It's really interesting.
Yeah, so I mean, it sounds like there's a couple things just to kind of like start to kind of summarize this. Like it's like that one of the barriers is of course just like the software development kit. Like you said, you feel that there's not a the right tooling out there for projects to start to integrate PayJoins into their services. And then there's also just this kind of like visibility component to this where it's not being talked about as an idea, or product designers aren't including it in their product designs, things like that. So if there's more visibility to it, if people actually had it as an option, then that it's something they might actually use. I was kind of curious too, because we have these things here called design challenges, which is basically these kind of like design problems that people could take and run with. I don't know. I wonder if that could be a design challenge or something, a like optimal PayJoin user flow or something like that. Because I know you said that you were looking at the Blue Wallet flow, and we're thinking about things that could be improved. So maybe that's a good kind of like privacy design challenge.
I think that would be inspiring to people too, because when I've talked about PayJoin before, I think it plays into the lack of hype you described earlier, is people don't even know what's possible. So if they can see what's possible, just a unified payment flow, and then what the consequences are, that could inspire some developers to add it to their projects. Not only the developers, a lot of the times there are business development managers that need to approve these things too.
Sweet. Well, this has been awesome. Dan, is there anything else you want to like? I was thinking about killing the recording a little bit here. Is there anything else you want to kind of talk about or think we should cover before we stop the recording?
I think you should try PayJoin if you get a chance to, and we have some work to do to add it to the guide. So thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thanks for coming to talk about this. All right. Later, everybody. I'm going to stop this record.